Welcome to my show, When Everyone Wins, where a key goal I have for you is shifting from power over and under to power within and between. I'm your host, Judy Ryan. In each episode, I'll share my knowledge from decades in workplace culture transformation and leadership development as the founder and CEO of LifeWorks Systems. I'll help you build trust and emotional and social intelligence. My show, When Everyone Wins, is about creating a life you love and helping others do the same. Welcome to our show, everyone. Today's episode is called Unconventional People Strategies that Expand Human Potential. And boy, do we need some of those strategies. Wherever people and organizations retain outdated and toxic culture practices that result in win-lose dynamics, everyone pays a price. Most people constrict in such environments and they're stunted in their development. They fail to bloom into their greatest potential to be creative, innovative, and empowered. And these potentialities are crucial at this time in order to meet our current challenges, such as the speed of change, the complexity, the new technologies, globalization, and much more. Over time, toxic practices result in failures and mediocrity for individuals and organizations. New strategies that prioritize the evolution and well-being of people over profit still are too often considered unconventional rather than mainstream, and these are vital. These new strategies lead to a greater sustained profit and consistent engagement, critical thinking, emotional and social intelligence, trust, wellness, and innovation. Leaders adopting the shift from profit first to people first recognize what is toxic and should be removed. And equally, they know what needs to be adopted instead and in addition. Today, this requires extra courage as those who are supporting win-lose are often holding on to the status quo with a death grip. And they're threatened and threatening to those who stand for win-win. Win-win leaders are those that respect and protect the peace, the equity, the inclusion for everyone. And that's why now is the time to hear from such courageous leaders. My guest today is one of them, and I'm very happy to introduce her to you. Her name is Kimberly Williams. Kimberly is the VP of People, Culture, and Compliance with Walker Advertising and the spokesperson for End Workplace Abuse. I first met Kimberly recently when she reached out to ask that I be counted as a business leader that stands for psychological safety by signing the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. Boy, is that needed now more than ever, not only in workplaces, but also in society overall. Kimberly was instrumental in fostering Walker Advertising's inclusive and award-winning culture, and is responsible for all aspects of people operations at Walker. She began her career as a diplomat with the U.S. Department of State, where she tackled complex personnel challenges negotiated at the United Nations in Vienna, and received an award for her unprecedented work in diversity and inclusion. As a former HR professional, she's been recognized for her integrity and interpersonal skills and creative approaches to recruitment and retention. She's appeared on nearly 60 podcasts and has been featured in outlets such as the NASDAQ, Haute Living, I'm not sure if I said the
yeah, it's okay.
Plus News and World Report, the Ritz Herald, and Entrepreneur. Welcome to the show, Kimberly. And I'm going to go ahead and just call you Kim since you gave me permission to do that. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I just cannot get over how much you've done already. And you don't look like you're even old enough to have done most of it.
So you're very, very sweet. It's the lighting in here. So thank you for saying that.
But I just want to also highlight you really are courageous, because nowadays, even if you just have diversity on your website or psychological safety or inclusion or any of those things, it's almost like you've got a target on your back. So thank you for your courage and your hard work in this area of creating safety and creating the conditions for people to expand.
Oh, happy to do it. Thank you.
So would you tell our audience about your work? It can be as an advisory council member and spokesperson for end workplace abuse, or at Walker Advertising, or at any of it?
Sure. Yeah. So, um, my day job is definitely with Walker Advertising, and they really are an incredible organization. I've been there 4 years now, and I don't think I could do the work I do at in workplace abuse if it didn't sync up at Walker. And Walker, I do feel like it's an organization that lives its values. So when I talk about all these things in workplace abuse and how important psychological safety is, there's no discomfort. In fact, I remember uh, early on when I first started really getting involved with in workplace abuse, it was about 2 or 3 years ago. And someone reached out from HR Brew about doing an article. And when they published it, the title was How to Sue Your Boss.
Oh, wow.
And my mom reached out and she's like, do you still have a job? Or you're going to be fired? And I'm like, no, my CEO likes it. Like, he has enough integrity to say, like, hey, don't do bad things, treat people fairly.
Mhm.
And so, so I'm really lucky to work with like great people where I work at. But then at the same time, too, I've just kind of grown over the years and talking more and more about the in workplace abuse component, because I just found that there wasn't enough information out there.
Mhm.
Prior to coming to Walker, I'd had some really tough experiences where I did have abusive bosses, where things kind of fell outside the lines. I went through a really intense process with, a chief executive that was just downright cruel, and, some of the behaviors. And I filed a number of complaints. I couldn't go to HR because I was in HR. And so I tried to work with attorneys, and they were too afraid to engage this individual. I went to the board. Some of them wanted to do something. The majority of them didn't. So I didn't have the votes there. And then, at the end of the day, they ended up just kind of sharing with the chief executive that I had gone and complained. Things got much, much worse. It was definitely a hostile work environment. And I ended up in this situation for the first time in my life where I'm like, okay, I'm an HR chief. I'm not even sure what to do here. It kind of woke me up to the fact that millions of people may also be going through something similar to this. And there's no map, there's no guide. Most people are too afraid to talk about it. It's considered shameful, it's considered taboo. And so I began kind of talking about this as a way to hopefully shine a light for other people, to give them some hope, to let them know kind of the inside HR speak on how to like navigate these situations, how to document things clearly. And things have just kind of evolved from there. And I'm kind of happy to say that more and more people are talking about abuse. Not that that's good, but I think that at least that stigma around it is gone. And I think that there's so many people who are sharing their stories with far less fear, and that ultimately translates into action and better behaviors.
Yeah, you've said so much here. First of all, I do think it's really important that a light is shined on it. And not only that, you were able to give an example of contrast. You have a psychologically safe, supportive, caring, and you know, emotionally intelligent company with Walker, but you also had firsthand experience of being in a powerless position, and yet you claimed your power. This whole tagline for our show is shifting power over and under, which is what you were experiencing in that toxic place, to power within and power between, and now you're fostering it in the work you're doing, the end workplace abuse work. So it's amazing how sometimes our worst experiences are the fuel for our activism in an area that we might otherwise be too afraid ourselves to move forward. So bravo to you. Will you give your definition of psychological safety? It doesn't have to be textbook, but I know a lot of people might hear that phrase and say, I don't even know what that means.
No,
And
it's a good question. Yeah, because, sometimes too, in the context of legislation, when we're talking to businesses about how we need psychologically safe workplaces, a lot of times I'll hear folks say, oh, well, what if I have a Gen Z employee and, they're going to say it's not psychologically safe because I'm not buying them a foosball table or something for the break room. And so for me, I kind of anchor on two things. One, in my day-to-day work, when it comes to HR, if there's been harm, that's all I need to hear. It doesn't matter whether it's, your definition of reasonable standard, my definition of reasonable standard. to me, that's a call to action that I need to explore and engage. And maybe this is something where there's no resolution. Sometimes we have folks that, may be sensitive in a way that one person might think is reasonable, somebody else may not think is. But at the very least, like, I don't ever want to run a shop where we run from that conversation and we don't dig in and try and move some conversation forward. I think a lot of what I also lean on, particularly when we're talking about legislation or doing things that, are more in line with policy, is simply looking at like the EEOC definition of harassment and what is the opposite of that. And so if you're in a space where, and they're very clear with this, if you're being screamed at, humiliated, left out of meetings, things that begin to have an impact on your job, I kind of live there with my thinking. And, if you're in a space like that, then I don't want to say objectively because that may not totally apply. But to me, I think you're definitely in that space where you're not in a psychologically safe work environment. The challenge with our laws right now is they're very clear about that, but they attach it to protected characteristics. So right now you have to go through the hurdle of saying, I'm in this unsafe environment and it's because I'm a woman or because of, whatever the situation may be. And what we're seeking to do is pass a law where it's like, nope, that's harm all by itself. You don't have to go through an extra step because that may be too difficult. Maybe I have to read someone's mind to say they're doing this because I'm a woman. And at the end of the day, if it's causing me incredible stress, if it's causing me to get sick, if it's causing me to have to go get therapy, if it's causing me financial ruin, does that totally matter? This is really hard for me to look at that.
Yeah, Kim, I would say that from my perspective, and I think it would agree with yours and blend with yours, psychological safety is when everyone in the environment is educated in, agrees to certain ways of treating one another, certain ways of communicating, so that there's no fear, even on the level that is not so abusive, but the level of I can speak my mind, I can try things and make mistakes. I don't have to fear for my status or my job. I'm accepted for who I am. And a lot of people don't know how to do that kind of communication that creates that kind of psychological safety, which is not so much about legalities, although those are included when there's abuse. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the sort of a sister to psychological safety, which is being trauma informed in the way that we operate. And trauma informed, in my opinion, is recognizing that people come to work with different sensitivities, different life experiences that are kind of traumatic, and they don't have to be big T traumas. They can be small T traumas. And when those are experienced in the workplace, it doesn't feel psychologically safe. And so I just really appreciate that you're helping people to have an understanding that allows them to be, say, oh, that's me. I didn't realize, I have a certain condition of celiac that I didn't even know was celiac. So I would never say I have celiac. I just would say I don't really do well with gluten. And then I found out I actually have celiac. So sometimes knowledge really is power around all of this.
Yeah.
So in your work as a diplomat for the U.S. Department of State, it's just like I feel like I'm talking to like professor or something. You managed staffing and recruitment, and you worked with 80 embassies and consulates and offices in the Bureau of European Affairs. You made policy recommendations. I don't know why you would ever stop doing that because that was awesome. So how would you share what you felt you accomplished there, what you're most proud of, and what you want our listeners to remember about themselves? Because what I see in you is somebody that is living into the power within, creating the power between. And we don't have enough current day role models of that. So please share from a place of braggadocio.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of funny because I think humility has been like a good North Star for me. So, it's funny. My dad was a very, very humble guy. He would constantly make fun of himself. He thought he was funny. We didn't think he was that funny. He made a lot of nice jokes. And so now I have a teenage daughter who's constantly like, Mom, you're not as funny as you think you are. But I like, and so that's okay. But like, for me, I feel like all my strengths were like the messiest moments. And so before I went into the State Department, I taught U.S. history at a college for 7 years. And I don't know if you know any 18-year-olds, they're not nice people. Like they will tell you like, oh, you were so boring. I don't like this. And so like lecturing to them can feel like a bloodbath. Like you can just get run through the ringer. But it's kind of the greatest gift anyone ever gave me, because like if you can spend 7 years trying to get this group of people interested in history, which most of them aren't majoring in, it's a required class, they're frustrated, they're annoyed, and get them to fall in love with like the drama and the emotional connection. And so it's those push points, and I think rising to some of those, I think can be really, really helpful. And so by the time I came a diplomat, like giving speeches to grown adults who would sit there politely felt like awesome. It was like really, really lovely and a totally different experience. But then you kind of ran into challenges in other ways. And so when I actually started with the State Department, I thought I would just be doing that. I thought it'd be kind of like on the educational component. I thought I'd be on the cultural side, working with press. And I originally started with that. But then early in my tenure, they put me into HR. And the day they did that, I was terrified. I was like, you can't do that to me. I'm a liberal arts major. You know, like I was really just like pushing back and kind of whining about it. But my very first day on the job, someone reached out to me in this very cryptic voice and said, hello, Kimberly. You're not finding me meaningful work, Kimberly. And I was like, what is happening? What is going on? And I went to my boss and I was like, I just got this call from somebody who sounds like Hannibal Lecter. And he was like, oh, he's trying to sue you. And like, for what? And he was like, well, you know, he got into some trouble. He's lost his security clearance, but there's a loophole in our rules that if I don't find him meaningful work, he may not get promoted. He'll suffer financial consequences, and I could be personally liable for that. And I loved this. I was like, this is so cool. This is so interesting. And I went from this place where I was kind of lecturing to a place where I was dealing with one-on-one scenarios. And so for me, this became like the love of my life in terms of career. But I also think what was really, really helpful from working with those kids and working on creative campaigns and coming up with lectures and telling stories is applying that to HR. Like HR is not cold, hard math. It is very, very personal. It is very, very deep. It's very, very intense work. And creative approaches are so critical to this line of work. And where I find that a lot of people fail is because they get scared of stepping outside of the lines. They get scared of making mistakes, so they don't engage at all. When I feel like the best, most powerful work that you see in HR is the stuff that says, you know, hey, we're in this situation none of us have ever seen before. I'm not going to run from it. I'm going to lean into it. This may not be the correct things, but I'm just going to start throwing out ideas and let's see how we can be creative. And if this is a problem we've never seen before, is there a solution we've never seen before? And really engage people on that human level. And I think following in that space and leaning into courage and kindness really can help you in any situation that can come out in the crazy world of human beings.
So, Kim, I'm going to just say a couple things here. I think that you're representative of where HR is expanding in a very positive way. You're really describing more of a way of approaching things from heuristic thinking, kind of coming up with solutions on the fly, using critical thinking skills. A lot of people that I've met in HR, and I know this is going to sound like a terrible thing to say, in my work in workplace culture, for years, we did not go through HR to introduce our culture model because a lot of the HR people in the past, at least, have been very conventional thinkers, very risk averse, do not like things where it's about empowering the entire staff so that everybody has a voice. This person came to you, it didn't threaten you. It gave you excitement, like, oh, I can work with this person dynamically in the moment, and I can be creative and innovative with this person so that we can find a solution instead of using control and domination and suppression and status quo ways of doing things. So I just want to say that I'm glad to hear you talk about it that way, because when we cannot treat people from purpose and values and have these creative approaches where we're human beings with each other, it just becomes legalities, even if it's just in the terminology. It just becomes more of a legal who's going to win, lose. And so I really appreciate that you saw these opportunities to become really human and to become really heuristic And that led you to being a person that can see these solutions around abuse and psychological safety. Wow. So anything else? Would you say that's what you were most proud of, is that you became that person that became very interpersonal?
Yeah, I do. And I think, figuring out how to tell stories, figuring out how to emotionally connect, trying to get into the root causes of things, separating people from the problem. But I also think, introducing as much kindness as possible will also protect you legally. Because, like, if you mistreat an employee and somebody's trying to sue you, they're going to come up with every creative possibility of how you could have accommodated someone or worked with someone. And so if you've demonstrated that you've tried to do that to begin with, you actually are also reducing liability at the same time, which I think is really important for employers to recognize. It's not a zero-sum game. In fact, by taking care of employees, you often are taking care of your company.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I believe in firm and respectful, firm and kind. And I think kindness is something that a lot of women leaders bring, but some really great male leaders also bring. But it's really a high value to, a pretty big group of people. And yet there are times when you have to stand firm, and you will be like those 18-year-olds. You'll be told things that don't feel kind in return. And I think that also comes when you're fighting this whole idea of abuse and bullying and toxicity in the workplace. You come up against people that are really scared of change. I remember when I would speak in front of a group of people about how my 5 kids they all knew how to run a family meeting by the time they were 5 years old. And I would have some criticism in the surveys, like, well, that's wrong. Kids need to know who's boss. And, and we were training them how to be followers and leaders, and training myself to be a follower of a 5-year-old when I wanted to steamroll that 5-year-old. So, but people get threatened by anything that's outside of the status quo. So yes, being kind is difficult when you're saying things that other people are afraid to look at or address. And so have you had any of that going on where you were kind and firm, but it was disruptive to someone?
Oh, yeah. Where I live is kind of power imbalances, right? Because we don't really have as many problems when you are talking to someone who's on the lower side of a power imbalance. And we see that across the board in HR. An hourly employee violates policy, you're fired. If an executive or someone that's considered highly valued does that, oh, now everybody panics. They don't want to look at the problem. They don't want to engage, or they try and come up with some, you know, soft performative remedy that doesn't really fix anything. And so I've also worked in these environments where, you've got abusive power situation where no one's ever been held accountable. And so the first time you raise that, you're going to get some really big feelings. And so you're going to see gaslighting, you're going to see mobbing. And so, and to me, which I think is really important or unfortunate, is that in the HR profession, they don't teach you about this stuff. I learned about it in diplomacy because they actually teach you how to manage up. They're very deliberate and thoughtful, and that's been a huge gift to me to carry into other places where, I can do a lot of heavy work before I walk into a conversation like that, where I know somebody's going to probably explode when I sit down and I say, we're opening an investigation into you. These behaviors were unacceptable. And so all the feelings that can come out could come out. And I think what I have really learned in those moments is the reaction is separate of me. It's not me. At the end of the day, I care about my integrity. You can have my job, like nothing else exists. I have to be able to look myself in the mirror. And I've always been able to do that, and I'm so proud of that. And so that brings me comfort in those moments, that when I'm walking in there and I'm having to kind of psychologically shield myself from whatever somebody else may be feeling. And so I've learned that, like, the best thing that you can do is not even so much what you say, and not even so much how you say it, is how you feel before you walk into that conversation.
Yes, it's all about intention.
Yeah.
And your intention is in the way that you hold yourself. Even when you say something that other people balk at, then later they'll often come back and say, well, I thought about that for a couple of weeks and you were right, or whatever. Sometimes they won't say that. But you're really talking about a couple of important things. You're talking about integrity. And I know any really powerful leader that is a change agent like you and myself. Like one of the prayers I have every day is, please release me from the need for love, approval, and acceptance from others. And it doesn't mean we don't want those things. It just means we can't be in service to people if we're overly concerned about whether they like us. And so if you hold an intention that's about the other person, like our mission is to create a world in which all people love their lives. And when I'm holding that and I know that's what I'm operating from, I'm not worried about whether they like the messenger today, So that integrity is so important. But you also talked about imbalance of power and how that's not taught. And actually imbalance of power is taught in the way we are societal. We use a lot of autocratic methods in parenting and education. We use them in workplaces. We use a lot of dangling carrots. We use a lot of praising, which is a kind of verbal, or criticizing, which is kind of verbal punishment, and a lot of pampering. Like you said, the executives have a different standard of justice for the executives as the frontline staff, perhaps. In our work, we make sure that when there's a project for the culture change, that all the levels are represented in the first project. And the ones that balk at that are the executives and the senior leaders, because they want to kind of hold themselves apart and up above. But what it does when we cause them to mix and mentor one another in peer or reverse mentoring, or lead groups, take turns leading groups, just like I did with my kids, where they took turns running the family meeting. It creates a camaraderie, a sense of real mutuality that is not possible just from talking about equality. It happens in the lived experience of it. And so I love it that you addressed that. I recently had a guy on our show that did the Netflix docuseries on Unlocked, a or a jail experiment. And it was all about restoring that balance of power so that the inmates became responsible for managing themselves. And that's what I see that you're doing in the work that you're describing. So what inspired you to be involved in this work?
Oh, that way of going through it. Yeah. No, I think, my dad definitely helped my approach to a lot of things. And I do think, I care deeply about people. And for me, I love that you talked about love. We're not supposed to talk about love in HR, but I do feel like love is everywhere. And I may be in a room and in a moment where I'm not getting a lot of love, but I'm still conscious of the threads that are coming from that conversation. So some of those backdoor closed conversations can impact thousands of people. And so they are so, so important. And I think about the human beings that will be impacted by those conversations. And so, that can be a positive piece of it. But I think too, just, my own journey of walking through that, whenever we meet somebody in workplace abuse, everyone has a horror story. Nobody just woke up one morning and was like, I'm just curious about this. I've had such a good life and nothing bad's ever happened. I'm just going to explore this. Everybody came and they're like, oh my God. And it's one of those things where we kind of joke, it almost makes you an evangelical. It's so painful that you don't want it to happen to anybody else. And there's now a lot of science behind that, where, that you've got really major studies that are being done that say the PTSD levels of someone who's gone through workplace abuse is comparable to combat veterans. And it's not hard to see why. When your job's in danger, your whole life can feel like it's in danger, especially if the job market's not great, if you have a unique skill set, if you're an older worker, if you're in a small community where a lot of jobs aren't available. It can be financial ruin, we find, for a lot of folks. And then that comes with a whole bunch of other health issues and psychological issues.
Well, science even says that whenever we witness somebody being abused, even, it shuts down our frontal lobe, which creates about 20 minutes until we settle down to where we can even think logically. It's like when you have a car accident, you can't even remember what insurance company.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Vander Kolk wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and he talked about developmental trauma and how those are things that cause, like you said, that PTSD or PSD. I don't know if I'm saying
PTSD. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so we emphasize that. And I, it's funny because I don't talk about love generally, other than that it's in our mission statement to create a life you love, And, but I think of people want to be loving. They don't necessarily have practical skills in how to be loving. And so in my heart of hearts, I always say our work is practical applications of love. And I think that's what you're doing when you're protecting people from abuse, when you're bringing in conditions where they're psychologically safe. It is a form of loving people. And it's a shame that that's considered squishy or soft, when it's really one of the hardest things to do, especially when we're faced with, win-lose dynamics. It's very hard to stay the course in caring for people. So you're inspired by your care and your love of people, basically.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say.
That's awesome. So what are some of the challenges that you've been facing, and how are you overcoming those challenges?
I think one of the big things that I think about a lot is getting businesses to recognize the value in these things that are kind of squishy, like we were just talking about. Like if you've got someone who lives and like they're focused on numbers, and that's not like a bad thing, right? I mean, none of us have jobs if we're not focused on numbers. We have to, we're all in the business to make money. But sometimes people can view like, oh, taking care of employees or certain types of employees is like counter to that, or is, a type of nuisance or something that's taking away from that mission. But I actually don't see it that way at all. I mean, there's the carrot and the stick components. And sometimes we talk more about the carrots. When people feel safe, they're more innovative. We've got plenty of research out there that is showing that, those with more diverse people at the top or better connected to markets, and, they're great leaders and they do all these wonderful things. But on that liability piece, I don't think we have enough conversation around that. And probably because we haven't had to. So, a lot of times when we're trying to push this bill that we're working on, the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, which is decoupling, harassment and saying that by itself can, you now have a path to hold employers accountable. But there already are ways to hold employers accountable. So if you're ignoring this stuff, you're really doing it at your own peril. And we've seen that in particular to Gen Z. I don't think they're 18 anymore, but, I actually really admire this generation. A lot of people want to label them as lazy, not fussy, but I think they're really calling out a lot of bad stuff that for my generation, we just put up with. And we're like, no, it really was wrong. We're trained not to question it. And so they will light you on fire. They will absolutely sink your reputation. There was a really incredible example, I think it was about 2 years ago. It was a construction site in Arizona where this boss was screaming obscenities at employees. She's sitting there filming, and he's like, I don't even care. Like, just shows you the degree of entitlement around that abuse. And her TikTok video went viral in like no time. Millions of views, ended up getting picked up by national press, destroyed that business, destroyed that career, as it should have. And so, you're seeing accountability come from that you won't soon kind of get over. We're also seeing a more creative plaintiffs bar where, in places like Texas, where I've seen, if there's a handbook that says we don't tolerate abuse, we don't tolerate this mistreatment, and they ignore it, that can be a breach of contract, violation. So somebody can sue on that basis. We've also just seen where shareholders are starting to go after boards, where you've got a toxic CEO that's gotten away with murder, but that gets out into the press and share prices drop, and now you've hurt their investment. And then I think, too, with AI and the way employees can now record conversations, they can now document in ways that were really difficult to kind of figure out. They can basically write their own demand letters, know whether it's legally compliant, and so much easier to connect with attorneys than ever before. And so the risks are so much more real for employers that you will be held accountable. And a lot of times, too, when you've got just this really bad bully, you're just kind of one heartbeat away from a discrimination claim or something that exists. And so people spend so much time and effort kind of avoiding a hard thing when, in truth, you could be way worse off financially. Like this, we're talking about devastating impacts on the bottom line by kind of ignoring that. And so for me, getting that buy-in from businesses and that recognition, I think, is really, really critical. And so I'm constantly thinking about ways to make a compelling case to them. And we actually have done work where we can quantify the cost of a brilliant jerk now.
There's a lot out there about that, about the cost of staff and disengagement and how toxic culture is contagious and how healthy culture is contagious. And it's not ping pong tables. It's well, people treat one another. Um, in a sense, what you're doing is a little bit like the Me Too movement did for sexual abuse. You're doing it for workplace abuse. And it does put more power within people. And just like right now, what's going on in our country, there's those warring factions between oppression and win-lose and real liberation and win-win and mutuality, mutual respect. It's so funny because I remember when I first told a marketing firm years ago, my mission statement, to create a world in which all people love their lives. And they said, oh, you can't say that to business owners. They don't care if their employees love their lives. And I finally realized then I don't want to work with them, you know,
And
because
our employees don't either. And so you're going to see that, like, there's a lot of talent that may go away with AI and some other things, but like the really brilliant people are asking for these things.
yes, yes. And it's you're probably trying to find that doorway in with those executive leaders, whether it's even a financial argument, like you just gave, that they could lose their reputation, they could lose their shareholders could be against them, the public could be against them. Also, just the cost of disengagement itself when people, or the sick time, and one of my challenges, and I don't know if you find this, is people that can be very apathetic about all of that, even the losses. I remember one time a man was in charge of 10 nursing homes and they were losing $8.8 million. And I said, well, what if I brought in something to help your two worst nursing homes and saved you 2.5 million? And he said, um, well, I'm used to the 8.8 million. I don't know what I'm going to get from the 250,000 I'm going to spend with you, I'm like, wow, you're used to the 8.8 million loss in turnover, and what else is there behind all of that is causing morale and all that. So how do you hold strong? And what is your purpose? Like if you had to state a purpose, what would it be?
Um, I think it's to show up and to help other people show up. And particularly in HR, I know HR takes a beating a lot of times. Sometimes they're going to bat for folks. I think if I could just do one thing in the world and feel good about it, it would be to help people navigate fear around these terrifying conversations that keep so much of this locked into place. And I think we're getting there, and I think we're making a lot of progress. And then I think, kind of adjacent to that is helping people find their words, like when we talk about like the example you even gave, like I worked with this organization, Rippling, which is our HRIS, and they're really amazing. And we came up with like an automatic calculation for the cost of a brilliant jerk. And they created a recipe around it. And you already nailed it. Like on 2 points you made, like, if you just witness abuse for like the next 20 minutes, like your brain is like processing and think about it. If you have experienced it, like nobody who gets humiliated in front of their peers by being screamed at a meeting is going to just go back to their desk and like dive right into work. They're going to be stuck in their heads. They're going to be reeling. And there are very real impacts to productivity for that. And so if you just take some common sense metrics, some things that have been used by like the big four agencies out there or consulting firms, and your average good employee is giving you a 90% return. So if you give them $100,000, they're going to give you $90,000 back after you take out dentist visits, water cooler talk, vacations, etc. And that's a good return. Average employees, a lot of them are around 60%. And that really disengaged, I hate my life, quiet quitting person's at 30%. And so Rippling actually came out with an automated formula around 360s. And we tested it on me, not to make me a brilliant jerk, just a jerk. So I'm not even brilliant, but like somebody you don't want to work with. And so because I think I'm awesome, I gave myself a 5 out of 5. I asked my boss for this test run to give me a 5 out of 5. And then I asked my peers and my subordinates to just give me a 1, say, oh my God, this person's a nightmare. Rippling actually took that and they immediately flagged me. So they scanned through the company and said, hey, there's a problem here. There's a discrepancy. And they pulled me out. And then they instantly took the salary data that's in the HRIS, which every HR person has access to, and just say, like, we just did like a rough calculation. So we took 2 peers, said I'm a nightmare. And we said, you know what? They don't have to deal with me as badly as my direct report. So we're going to take 30% off their pay. And we're going to calculate that number. And we're just going to put that over to the side. And then for her 4 direct reports, we're going to say at least 50%. of a productivity loss. And they calculated that number. And very quickly, they said, my ugly behavior cost $240,000.
Wow. I love
Totally
that you
different.
use data that way. I really love that because we measure the things that kind of fit around those disengagement, and we do that on the leaders purposefully. It's not a full 360. But when you I was reading about, what is the cost of a brilliant jerk, and I want to just talk a little bit about that, because first of all, I love it that you can quantify that. That's super important. But also, sometimes those brilliant jerks are hard to let go because they're also very high asset people. They wouldn't be in the positions of power if they weren't. So in our work, we actually call that a mistaken goal of significance, which is a form of misbehavior when a person is a brilliant jerk. It's that even no matter how high of an asset they are to an organization or how accomplished they actually don't feel okay. And so they're unconsciously trying to get people to take them down and invalidate them. And that sounds crazy, but it's a truism. And I remember one time there was this woman who she and her husband owned a $35 million company. And their HR manager called me and said, "Oh my God, you need to come in and help us." Well, when I got there, it was only the husband and the HR manager. And he said, "Well, we don't want to invite the wife to this meeting." I was like, "No, can't do that. Have her involved." Well, when she came to the next meeting, she was so toxic. She was so much of a jerk and was almost proud of it. She was like that sort of energy of invalidating people, other people. And I knew right then and there that she was in this misbehavior. And I said to her, I said, you know, you want to go from 35 million to 100 million. And I believe you'll be able to do it because you have an incredible service, except for it's something that you personally are doing that you cannot see. And if you let me help you with it, I will help you with it. But if you don't, it's going to make it really hard for you to get to that 100 million. And she did what we call upping the ante. She got real like invalidating to me. She was like, "Well, why do you think you can help me? You're not as big as me and you don't have as many awards as I have." And I just said to her, I would not invalidate her. I said, "You're absolutely right. I don't make as much money. I don't have as many awards. And there are so many things I could learn from you. But this one thing you could learn from me if you let me help you." And it was really interesting because when you turn around, she did turn around. She even said, "Oh my God, if you only knew how my father treated me growing up, he constantly criticized me." Most people don't even have like a sense of connection to that. And my mother was a paragon of virtue. And I said, "Well, wouldn't it be great if I could help you get past all of that so you could even have a more effective team?" So the point I'm making is sometimes a brilliant jerk needs to be let go. And it's very costly if they're not. But sometimes a brilliant jerk, when understood, can be turned around. And then they become one of the most incredible assets that the company has because they're not being a brilliant jerk, they're being a brilliant asset. And so I just want to say that because I think tons of people, if you say the phrase, "Who in the leadership do you think of as who died and made you God?" You know, they know who you're talking about, whatever leaders fall into that jerk. But what they don't really believe a lot of the times is that that could be turned around if everybody became, like you said, give them the right words, give them the right strategies. And I had to remember about this powerful woman that she did not feel okay. I had to remember that because otherwise she would have got me worried about me being okay. "Oh, you don't make as much money and blah, blah, blah," you know? And so we have to remember for people who they actually are. So I love it though that you talked about the cost of it, because if you don't see the cost of something, you won't do anything to try to fix it.
Right. You're right.
So anything else about that whole brilliant jerk conversation?
Just that anybody can do it. Like a lot of times I tell folks, like, you don't have to be in HR. You can go on Glassdoor and get a rough idea of what a salary is. Like if you're on a team of analysts, in theory, everyone should be making about the same unless there's seniority or some other things like that. So just say, okay, there's 6 of me reporting to this one person. This is my salary times 6. You have a ballpark figure that you can use to kind of run through that process and make that case to HR. And sometimes too, I think it's also helpful for folks to know, like, if HR is not your friend, sometimes they are, sometimes they're just not empowered to be, that they're trying to manage up. And so speaking a language that lets them move that forward, that arms them. And so a lot of times I help people find, like, hey, here's a company just like ours, sued for behavior just like ours. And it doesn't have to be raised in a scary, malicious, threatening way, but it's just a data point. Like, look, here's a problem right here. I'm trying to help you avoid this. This is very real. Can also be powerful too.
Yeah, it's I think one of the challenges that you probably find and a lot of people in your position find is how do I respect the leaders and the employees simultaneously? Because there's lots of people that come at it from the leaders are all the enemy. And then there's a lot of people that come at it as the employees are all the enemy and all that us against them dynamic and how to bridge that where they grow more collaborative and more cooperative and more effective with each other. It takes it out of that. I always think of people running to HR a lot of times when they don't have the skills. It's like a kid going, I'm going to go tell mom. I'm going to go tell dad,
Oh, yes.
"Be that mom.
Right. Yes.
Or that dad. So helping to bridge that relationship so that it's no longer top down and power over and power under. That is the key. And yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's so important to build those relationships before there's a conflict or before there's a problem.
Yes.
So back in the old days when I was working in person, if I started a new place, like my number one goal was 20 cups of coffee. I was going to, from all levels of the organization, I wanted to see their office, say, oh, is this your family? Tell me about your kids, whatever that is, so that, if there ever came a point where we have to have a difficult conversation, it's not our first conversation. There's something else there. And then I also think it's really important when you're working with leaders to give them safety, to say, like, I am your thought partner in this. This is a cone of silence, because it's very lonely for leaders. And so a lot of times they don't, they can't go to their subordinates to say, oh, I'm really struggling with indecision. I don't know what to do. And so by giving them that safety, again, if you come into a place where there's a disagreement, that's not the entirety of your experience with this person, that there's some trust that's established somewhere from there. And then I think too, as you're trying to help people, if they come with people problems or things like that, at no approach and no time am I'm like, oh, you did a very bad thing. I never do that with anyone. I'm just like, okay, this is the problem in front of us. How do we want to fix it? But then, as well, trying to, as much as you can, do your thought processes and say, okay, like, let me just walk down this scenario. Like, I want us to be kind. I want us to be these things. So they're not just understanding the outcome, but they're understanding how you got there. And like, and then it lets them say, well, they can challenge it. They can talk through it and say, hold on a minute, like, let's break this down. Does this work? Does this not work? But hopefully it reinforces a lot of good things that ultimately, even if we're having to term someone or do something that feels bad, that there is love in there, that like, okay, this is a protective act now. And this is hurting the team. This is hurting the company. This is hurting consumers. This is hurting whoever. And this is how we want to address that. So all of that can be worked out up front.
I love it because I hear in what you're saying a respect for everyone at every level, which is seeing the beauty and the power within each person. And I don't know if it was Maya Angelou or who said it, but when people know better, they do better.
Yeah.
And just having the right support. And most people think of the leaders as not needing the support, the employees need it, but the leaders need it also.
Everyone does. Yeah.
About creating a supportive environment for everyone.
Yeah.
So, I was looking at some of your work on LinkedIn, and I love the quote that you had in there called, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, tell me your thoughts about that, but also what cave do you think most people are afraid to enter?
I think that they're afraid to say, I'm hurting, you've hurt me, because we've seen so many data points where, that does not end well for folks. And that was my fear. Like, so when I realized that, I had played by the rules, I had raised complaints, and that nobody was going to help me. And I was absolutely terrified. I was a single mom. I was worried about what was going to happen in my career. I had, all kinds of stress around this. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to write this up. I'm going to have to just figure this out on my own. And so I had to spend a lot of time grappling with fear. And I spent a lot of time talking and almost kind of laughing about how scared I was. I'm doing that because I'm trying to normalize it.
Mhm.
And when I actually wrote this one memo saying, here's all this bad stuff that's happening, I shouldn't be having to write this. I expected to get fired on the other side of that. And my hands were shaking when I hit, like when I was like typing everything. In fact, I didn't even hit send. Like I actually saved it on my phone, went and got in my car at the end of the day, drove out of the parking lot, hit send as I was leaving. That's how scared I was to send that email because it felt like, you know, I'm not going to make my mortgage, my child, I don't know what happened, terrified. Um, and so, but I started developing these mantras because several of these moments came up over and over again. And it was never as bad as I thought it was going to be. And I can't guarantee that for everyone. But I began to change. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid to walk through the fire. And to me, that is the greatest gift that you get in all of that. By standing up and speaking your truth and figuring out how to advocate for yourself, you will be forever different. You will show up different. And so that is the cave that you fear to enter is the treasure that you seek. It's safety. You will be stronger and safer and braver by doing the thing that terrifies you the most.
You gave me the chills because I agree with you completely. It's moving toward your integrity, even when you're scared to death.
Yeah.
We teach this one tool called the frustration tool, where you say, I don't like it when you do this behavior because what I most desire is, and so here's the behavior change. What I want is, and are you willing? And this one very timid secretary was part of the culture change. And she had her CIO who was very delightful and who had brought in the culture change. But there was this other CFO who was had a reputation for leading by intimidation. And she had to work with him halftime, and he would cancel meetings and not tell her. And she would freak out, like, oh my God, did I get the wrong date, the wrong time, the wrong location? And he would do this repeatedly. So when she learned this tool, called the frustration tool, she practiced it with her mentor. I happened to be sitting in, that's how I knew about it. I was overseeing. And she went to him and said, hey, I just want to tell you, I don't like it when you cancel meetings and you don't tell me. Because what I most desire is to have peace and to do a great job and to be efficient and effective and knowing where I'm supposed to be going. And I want good teamwork with you. So what I want is for you to text me, call me, or email me if you're going to change a meeting. Are you willing? And he said to her, lady, who the hell do you think you are? How dare you? I pay your paycheck. You don't pay my paycheck. Like worst case scenario.
Yeah.
She came back and she called me and she was shaking. And I said, well, how did you do in your yard? Because we talk about your yard and their yard.
Mm-hmm.
She said, I'm really proud of myself when I think about what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yeah, you will be forever changed because you knew you care about not hurting people. And you knew that the way you did that was not hurtful to him or you, that it was respectful to both of you. And she said, you're right. And I said, his reaction is his yard. And that's none of your business. And so, she called me about 3 months later and said, you know what? He came over today and said to me, what is this stuff you guys are doing over here? And then he went into the CIO and said, what is this stuff you guys are doing over here? Because people were leaving his department to move to her department because they could see how different the way they were operating from such integrity and such support. She wouldn't have been able to do it just like you. I don't know how you did it without the support you needed. I mean, I don't blame you for going out in your car.
Yeah.
It probably terrified somebody would come in and say those things to you, like, who the hell do you think you are and all that, right? And you're fired. She was scared of that too. The reality is most things that we do from an intention of respect, you can't really be fired over. Who is going to fire her over complaining to him in that conscious way about canceling things and not telling her, So I love it that you gave that example of how scared you were, but how much you gained because you really did gain your power within.
Yeah.
And now you're able to strengthen other people to have that same power within and that power between one another. And I'm in awe of you, honestly, Kim. I'm in awe of you.
Thanks.
So, all right. So I want to just talk a little bit about women. And I know this is not a show just for women, But there was a book called The Power Code where Caddy Kay, who is a British, uh, like a person that's on MSNBC or something, and another woman named Claire Shipman, they said that women view power a little differently than has been traditionally male approach to win or to power, which is kind of dog eat dog and zero sum and all of that. So were there women who inspired you to create the safety and mutual respect in win-win, or men, either one?
I think both. I mean, I've definitely had some incredible bosses. Uh, One man, I'll go ahead and say his name. Mark Taplin was an absolute prince of a human being, and I remember just so much love and respect for this man. He never lost his temper. I would watch him speak to prime ministers at the State Department and the cleaning person with the exact same degree of respect, and he was brilliant on top of it. And so some of my worst moments, I'm like, what would Mark do? And I try to think about that. But also, like, I also had the good fortune of growing up with really strong women. My mother was the most terrifying person I ever met. And, she was a person who wasn't on the right side of a power imbalance. But, like, I watched her. Like, she stood up for herself. And I learned a lot, on that, And then, in the State Department, too, I worked around some incredibly strong women who, like, they didn't care what someone thought in terms of power. They didn't care how high ranked you were. And so for me, my experiences in HR were normalized in a way that I think has really been helpful, where I watched these women call up, ambassadors and, men and women at really high stature and saying, I don't care. What you did was wrong. That was unlawful. And, and we're going to have a conversation and I'm going to write you up on this. And so, that I think I'll never forget, I'm really careful with that with my own team. When I vet people and look to bring people on, I want to see that they have such high integrity that they could tell me, that they can tell an executive. And a lot of times I'll use that as a scenario test, kind of question in interviews. Like, you just, a CEO or a board member just did something unethical. How would you respond? Because I want to know, like, do you have the courage to say something in that moment? Or would you just run away like plenty of other people do? And that's fine. But like for my team, I definitely, I want us to live our values.
I loved so much of what you said. Even your mom being terrifying. That's such a funny thing because in a way we call it bending the coat hanger. You know how a coat hanger, it's bent the wrong way. You can't hang anything up on it. So you have to bend it the opposite way to make it all, you got to see that almost domineering kind of power, which was power over, but it was a nice balance to what so many people do, which is what we call pseudo community, where we're people pleasers and we're always trying to be sugar and spice and all of that. But also you saw, and I believe that the feminine qualities are win-win, whether they're in a man or a woman.
Yeah.
And the ability to be firm is that masculine energy, firm and focused, and it's in powerful women and men. And so what I hear you saying is you took the best of your mom, but you also took that kindness and that respect. Was it Mark that you said his name was?
Yeah.
Yeah. He had that balance of power within himself. So he had the power within and the power between. And you said, oh, I'm going to take the strength and courage of my mother, and the times I'm sure she did power within. But I'm also going to temper it with respect, temper it with kindness wherever possible, with my intention, with my energy of being the kind of person that wants to be in service. Real service is telling the truth. And it's so funny because I think when you talked about the Gen Zs where they'll fight for themselves, to find a way to do it without becoming chaotic, where you end up in a power struggle.
Yeah.
Freaking go beyond that, where you can really hear one another and you can be open with one another, but not trying to convert anybody, and that's what I see in you. So I just can't tell you how much I appreciate everything you're saying today, everything you've been doing. And, our episode has been about unconventional people strategies. And it's really the second part of the title that I love the most, that expand human potential. Because we want people to love their lives, who they are here to be. and to be that potential person that brings about a cure, or help somebody to stop being bullied, or help somebody to be safe, or help somebody to bring the next new creative resolution, which causes joy. So I just want to tell you, I'm so grateful that you are in this world, that you are doing this work, and that you are bringing these unconventional people strategies that expand human potential with such grace and such courage. Thank you so much, Kim.
Well, thank you. Everything you're doing is pretty incredible as well. So this was a real treat to chat with you today.
Thank you. You've been listening to When Everyone Wins, where we're shifting power over and under to power within and between. I'm Judy Ryan, your transformation talk radio host. Tune in each second and fourth Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific time to learn new concepts and tools and listen to conversations I have with thought leaders and change agents. You'll also see real-world applications of what I'm covering so that you experience the power of the concepts and tools I share. In each episode, I bring you my knowledge from decades in workplace culture transformation and leadership development as the founder and CEO of LifeWorks Systems. I invite you to call in with your unique stories and questions. The path to ensure that everyone wins depends on our ability as people to create a life we love and help others do the same. For more information, visit lifeworksystems.com.